What you see here are a selection of needles that I, as a cardiac surgeon, use in my daily practice. They go from the very small to the very big. But no matter the size of the needle, they all share the same common anatomy. There's the sharp, pointy end. There are different cuts on this depending on the needle. There is the shaft, what I like to call the working length of the needle. And in cross-section, this particular area is not exactly round, but more cuboidal. And the third important area is the area where the thread, or in this case steel, meets the needle itself, the swage. Now there are two no-go areas for instrument handling. One is this area here, because you may break the suture or it might fall out. The second no-go area is the sharp area, as your instrument will damage the point. You'll notice that all needles, no matter what their size, are made on a circle. And this is very important in the fundamental understanding of stitching. This needle needs to pass through the tissue on that circle to ensure that the thread sits cleanly within the tissue. The point of rotation of the upper limb is between the head of the radius and the middle and index fingers. It is therefore important to place your instrument, the needle holder, along that line of rotation. It is supported in the hand by the ring and fifth finger and is held not too dissimilar to a benediction sign. To actually take the needle on and off the ratchet requires that the thumb opposes, and you use your femur eminence to take the ratchet off the needle holder. Now that requires some practice, and I'd encourage you to get a needle holder and practice very simply taking the ratchet on and off. When I pass my junior staff in the corridor, I ask, "How are you today?" and I expect them to reply with a chirpy cricket sound. Take a look at the end of this needle as I now go through pronation. You'll see that that rotation is probably just over 270 degrees, but in doing so, the tip of my needle holder has actually remained relatively steady. Contrast this with putting your fingers through the instrument. Notice the rotation now is somewhat limited, and you'll find that this limitation is exacerbated if you are required to move into a different position to stitch. Very early on in my career, my consultant encouraged me to hold the needle holder like this, a benediction sign. I've never regretted it, because I found that I can actually rotate my forearm in every position to affect the perfect rotation of the needle under every condition. I do that today, all day, every day, and teach my trainees the same. So your job as a surgeon is to carry your needle through the tissue very cleanly indeed. Imagine a diver diving into an Olympic swimming pool. The winner enters the pool with no splash. In a similar manner, you need to ensure your needle enters the tissue and exits the tissue with no splash, such that when looking at a tangential slice of the passage of the needle through the tissue, we should see a perfect hole created by the needle. The thread should sit comfortably in that hole. If you drag the needle into or out of the tissue, you will find you'll end up with an elliptical hole. Now I can see that clearly in cardiac surgery as my anastomosis bleeds or oozes or sweats. The general surgeons will recognize that this space is a potential for a microabscess. They unfortunately only find out 5 to 7 days later, but the principle is the same. Safe, clean stitching is carrying your needle on a perfect circle through the tissue, and there's no space. You can only do that with an understanding of what the needle does and the anatomy. The next step is to understand how to pick up the needle whilst respecting the anatomy and enabling a perfect rotation through the tissue. 90 degrees is a perfect angle. It is the fourth part of a circle. And if we align our needle to 90 degrees across the tissue, into the tissue, and on top of the tissue, we can then rotate the needle cleanly through the tissue. Let me show that to you. A needle is often passed on a needle holder some distance from the tip and also mounted at 90 degrees. But if I take this needle down to the surface, you can see that it doesn't sit at 90 degrees on the surface. Now there's some mathematical angles to understand here. We explained that the functional anatomy of the upper limb is best with the elbow slightly extended. You will see that there's an angle between the horizontal and my forearm. This angle mathematically correlates with the angle that you need to rotate the needle out, forwards or backwards, on the needle holder to achieve that 90 degrees. I won't go into the maths or draw the angles, but trust me, it does work. So if I apply that principle to this needle, I now put the needle at the tip of my needle holder and I angle it out at that angle. That angle there is the same as that angle there. You'll see when I take my needle down, it now sits 90 degrees to the tissue. All I need to do now is actually get my body in the position required to ensure that not only I'm 90 degrees to the tissue, but I'm 90 degrees across the tissue I want to work on. Then I point the needle into the tissue, guess what, at 90 degrees, and simply rotate. It couldn't be simpler, could it? The principle of stitching is not only to put the needle perpendicular to the tissue, I actually call this the belly bounce, but perpendicular across what we want to stitch. All I need to do then is to rotate the needle backwards, continue the rotation into the tissue smoothly and gently. The tissue holds the needle in the right position to enable you to pick it up and to do it again. Now for this, I'm using a very, very big needle. I've also placed the potato on the countertop. But I'd like to think that I'm thinking not only out the box, but in the box. You appreciate our operations are often at depth, inside the body cavity. And this basin represents that depth. And it's important that you practice these maneuvers with the potato inside a pudding basin, because the angles at depth are completely different. And it does mean that you have to move your body into the right position to ensure that those three 90-degree planes, 90 degrees sagittally to the potato, 90 degrees across what you want to stitch, and then 90 degrees into what you want to stitch, are all maintained. You will notice that if you get that right, the needle will do the work for you, will exit the tissue, enable you to pick it up cleanly to do it again. Now if you look carefully, you will see that on the exit there, I have actually pulled the potato off. And I put it to you, that's because I dragged the needle out. What is beautiful about this model is that the tearing of the potato skin will give you immediate feedback as to whether you've done this gently or correctly. Not only that, the bowl and the potato begin to move around. The next important part of stitching is to understand how to move this needle to backhand without actually touching the needle. My colleague in Papworth refers to this as sexy maneuvers. In essence, we're going to pirouette this needle over the top to backhand. And note, the position on the backhand is similarly angled out to compensate for that angle. Let us take the surface away from me. Again, I line the needle 90 degrees across to the surface I want to stitch. I place the needle 90 degrees across what I want to stitch, and then simply rotate the needle back and point the needle into what I want to stitch and effect a rotation. Being very careful to actually move the needle through the tissue, in this case the potato, on that circumference and deliver it cleanly without actually tearing the potato. You'll note when I come to the opposite side, again I need to change my body position, and this will become obvious to you as you're practicing. In this circumstance, I am actually going to align the needle 90 degrees across the tissue again, 90 degrees to the tissue, and need to rotate it 90 degrees into the tissue. But you see how my shoulder is now enabling that pronation and supination. The circumduction of the shoulder is getting my elbow in the air, allowing me that position and allowing me to effect the rotation. It's a bit like putting a cupboard together, isn't it? You'll find this model works a lot easier if you cut the potato in half and put it on a flat surface. For demonstration purposes, we are going to keep this on the table, but for your practice at home, I urge you to put this in a bowl. To progress through your belts in this Black Belt Academy, I would like you to be able to take your needle backhand through the potato, pick it up cleanly, turn the needle to forehand, and do the same the opposite direction. Through the potato, pick it up cleanly, deliver the needle, and you note that a slight tear there, so it wasn't as clean as it ought. Mount the needle backwards again and do the opposite way. I want you to be able to do this on each surface of this potato. On the top, away from me, towards me, to my right, and to the back. The next model that I'd like to introduce to our needle skills is the banana. We are going to go bananas. So, you're ready to become a black belt. You have spent time practicing with your needle and now believe that you can take this needle through the tissue cleanly all the time, every time. Your last exercise is to actually embroider the edge of this banana and demonstrate 12 perfectly radial sutures. And in doing so, you'll find that you have to move your body from forearm to backhand and move your weight from right foot to left foot as we progress around this, inverted commas, anastomosis. I do this with my non-dominant hand behind my back. The important thing is to do it deliberately and carefully. Remember, we've demonstrated the banana actually will show you where you've been rough and difficult. And although I've been in business for some time, I can assure you that this is a difficult and tricky exercise. This is another example of stitching the edge of the banana. What we're looking for are perfectly radial sutures that are equidistant, radial, 90 degrees to the edges, all the way round. I've stopped because I've run out of thread. But the important thing to notice is that the exit point of the needle through the banana at each point is a clean punctum. The rotation of the needle has therefore been perfect. If I was criticizing myself, and you have to as a surgeon in your daily practice, that is not as deep as that, and that angle is slightly irregular. A colleague of mine I know used to actually say to himself each time he went through a coronary vessel, good shot, good shot, good shot. And he was employing these basic principles all the time, every time, in his stitching. I try and do the same in my stitching every day in theatre. And I aim to get perfectly radial sutures and a clean exit of the needle from the tissue.